In 1886, while most of America still moved at the speed of a horse, a 33-year-old Pennsylvania blacksmith named George B. Darmont was building tools by hand in a small workshop near Conneaut Lake. He wasn't trying to build an industrial empire. He wasn't looking for investors. He wasn't thinking about market share. He simply believed the tools available to farriers and mechanics were not good enough. Every winter he forged hoof nippers, pincers, and cutting tools from raw steel. Every spring he loaded them into a wagon and traveled town to town selling them directly to working men. When the wagon emptied, he sold the wagon itself, bought a train ticket home, and started forging again. That cycle became the foundation of Champion Bolt and Clipper Company, the business that would eventually become Channellock. For decades, the company survived on one principle. If a tool was built better than everyone else's, workers would find it. The philosophy carried the company through financial disaster, through the panic of 1893 when a bank employee stole nearly all of its operating cash, and through the rapid industrialization of America. By the early 20th century, Champion Tool Company had moved to Meadville, Pennsylvania, a manufacturing town built on steel, railroads, and machine shops. There the company expanded steadily, producing tools for horsemen, farmers, mechanics, and tradesmen across the country. But by the 1920s, a problem was emerging that threatened the entire business. The automobile was replacing the horse. Every year, fewer blacksmiths needed farrier tools. The market that had created the company was slowly disappearing. Most firms facing that reality would have spent their remaining years defending a dying product category. Champion Tool did something different. It searched for what came next. That answer arrived in the early 1930s through an engineer named Howard Manning. At the time, adjustable pliers already existed, but they were frustrating tools. Their slip-joint designs weakened under heavy load. The pivot carried too much stress, jaws slipped, mechanics lost grip, plumbers fought with pipe fittings. Manning believed the entire concept could be redesigned. Instead of relying on a single pivot point, he developed a tongue-and-groove channel system that distributed force across multiple positions while maintaining strength. The jaws could open wider without sacrificing grip. The tool adapted to the workpiece rather than forcing the worker to adapt to the tool. In 1933, the first version entered production. In 1934, United States Patent 1,950,362 was granted. Few patents in hand tool history would prove more influential. The new pliers were unlike anything most tradesmen had ever used. A plumber could carry one tool instead of several. An electrician could adjust instantly to different fittings. Mechanics could grip pipes, nuts, and irregular shapes without constantly changing tools. The design solved real problems faced by real workers every day. Orders surged. Hardware stores demanded more inventory. Contractors began recommending them to apprentices. The tongue-and-groove plier spread through workshops, factories, construction sites, and garages across America. Within a generation, something unusual happened. People stopped asking for tongue-and-groove pliers. They started asking for Channellocks. The company had not even changed its name yet, but the product had become so dominant that the brand itself became the category. The transformation was remarkable. A business that had nearly been rendered obsolete by the decline of horse-powered America had reinvented itself around one of the most successful hand tool innovations of the 20th century. In a small Pennsylvania factory surrounded by the noise of forging presses and grinding wheels, the future of the company was being built one pair of pliers at a time. The blacksmith's wagon was gone. The farrier market was fading into history. But a new American tool icon had just been born. The timing could not have been worse or better. Howard Manning's revolutionary tongue-and-groove pliers arrived in the middle of the Great Depression When businesses across America were collapsing and unemployment was reaching levels the country had never experienced before. Yet the very conditions that devastated much of the economy created an opportunity for a tool that could do more with less. Contractors could not afford large collections of specialized tools. Mechanics needed equipment that worked harder and lasted longer. Farmers repairing machinery during difficult years wanted tools they could trust. The new Champion pliers answered all of those needs at once. Throughout the 1930s, orders steadily increased as the company's reputation spread through word of mouth. Unlike consumer products driven by advertising campaigns, hand tools lived or died by what happened on the job site. A plumber who found a better tool showed it to another plumber. An electrician recommended it to an apprentice. A mechanic loaned it across a workbench. The tool sold itself because it solved problems workers encountered every day. Inside the Meadville factory, production expanded to keep pace. Forging hammers pounded glowing steel into shape. Grinding wheels sharpened jaws and teeth. Workers learned that precision mattered. The unique channel design depended on tight tolerances. If the groove geometry was even slightly wrong, the adjustment mechanism would lose the strength that made the tool special. Every improvement in manufacturing reinforced the company's growing reputation for durability. Then the world changed. In 1941, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, America entered World War II. Suddenly, factories across the nation were transformed into part of the war effort. Meadville was no exception. Steel allocations became tightly controlled. Production schedules were reorganized around military priorities. Tool manufacturers found themselves supplying equipment not only to civilian tradesmen but also to shipyards, aircraft factories, military depots, and countless defense contractors. Channellock's pliers became indispensable in wartime production. From naval shipyards building destroyers and aircraft carriers to factories assembling bombers and tanks, workers needed reliable hand tools capable of operating under harsh conditions. The company's forging expertise proved especially valuable because military manufacturing demanded tools that could withstand constant use without failure. During the war years, the Meadville plant operated at an intensity few workers had ever experienced. The sound of drop hammers echoed through the building from dawn until late at night. Men and women worked long shifts as America mobilized its industrial power. Every pair of pliers leaving the factory represented another small contribution to a much larger effort. By the end of the war, Channellock had become deeply woven into the fabric of American industry. The company emerged stronger, larger, and more respected than before. But perhaps the most important development came after the war ended. During the 1950s, America entered an era of unprecedented construction and infrastructure growth. New suburbs appeared around every major city. Factories expanded. Highways stretched across the continent. Millions of homes, schools, offices, and industrial facilities required plumbers, electricians, pipe fitters, welders, and maintenance technicians. Those workers needed tools, lots of tools. Channellock was perfectly positioned to supply them. As demand increased, the company searched for ways to make its products instantly recognizable. Bare steel tools all looked similar, hanging on a hardware store wall. Workers often reached into crowded toolboxes where dozens of different tools competed for attention. The solution was deceptively simple. During the late 1950s, Channellock began coating its handles with a distinctive blue plastic grip. The color was bright enough to stand out immediately. A tradesman could identify it from across a room. On a crowded construction site, a blue-handled plier became unmistakable. What began as a practical design choice gradually evolved into one of the strongest visual identities in the entire tool industry. Soon electricians, plumbers, and mechanics across America associated that particular shade of blue with reliability. The color became part of the product's identity. At the same time, the company continued refining its manufacturing process. Better heat treatments improved durability. More precise forging methods strengthened jaws and teeth. Quality control became increasingly rigorous. The company understood something many competitors missed. Professional tradesmen remembered failures. A tool that broke at the wrong moment could destroy years of trust. Channellock's reputation was built not on marketing slogans but on avoiding those failures. By the early 1960s, the transformation was complete. What had begun as a blacksmith's tool company serving horsemen had become one of America's most respected hand tool manufacturers. The tongue and groove plier had become a standard piece of equipment in nearly every trade. Hardware stores stocked them nationwide. Contractors specified them. Apprentices learned with them. In 1963, recognizing that the product had become more famous than the original company name, Champion Darment Tool Company officially renamed itself Channellock Incorporated. It was a remarkable moment. A single invention had become so successful that it reshaped the identity of the entire business. Few companies in manufacturing history have ever experienced such a transformation. Yet the decades ahead would present challenges even greater than the Depression or World War II. Foreign competition was coming. Globalization was approaching. Entire American industries would disappear. Factories that had operated for generations would close forever. And in that environment, Channellock would face the most important decision in its history: whether to follow everyone else overseas or stay exactly where it had always been. Would you like me to continue with Part 3, 1960s to 1980s? Globalization begins, the blue-handle trademark, rising foreign competition, and how Channellock prepared for the battle that destroyed much of American hand tool manufacturing. By the late 1960s, Channellock had reached a point that very few industrial companies ever achieve. The product was no longer simply successful. It had become part of the language. Plumbers did not ask a helper to hand them a tongue and groove plier. They asked for a Channellock. Electricians asked for a Channellock. Pipe fitters asked for a Channellock. The brand name had quietly become the category itself. That kind of success creates a strange problem. The more successful a product becomes, the greater the risk that competitors will copy it, dilute it, and eventually turn decades of reputation into something generic. Inside the Meadville factory, management understood exactly what was happening. The company had spent more than 30 years building trust around Howard Manning's 1933 design. If they lost control of the name, they could lose everything that made the tool valuable. In 1963, the Darment family made a decision that would shape the future of the company. Champion Darment Tool Company officially became Channellock Incorporated. The entire corporation adopted the name of the tool that workers trusted most. This was not a marketing stunt. It was a defensive move designed to protect one of the most recognized tool brands in America. The company understood that if customers across the country already thought of adjustable tongue and groove pliers as Channellocks, then the business itself needed to own that identity before someone else tried to take advantage of it. While many American manufacturers spent the 1960s diversifying into unrelated industries, Channellock remained focused on the people who actually used tools for a living. New jaw sizes appeared. New handle lengths appeared. Specialized versions were developed for electricians, mechanics, and industrial maintenance crews, yet the core philosophy never changed. Every tool had to solve a real problem. Every design change had to justify its existence on a job site rather than in a conference room. Workers on the Meadville production floor often repeated a simple idea: a tool was either useful or it was not. Advertising could not fix a bad tool. Packaging could not fix a bad tool. Only performance mattered. That attitude became embedded into the company culture. By the early 1970s, American manufacturing was entering a period of growing pressure. Foreign competition was increasing. Labor costs were rising. Imported hand tools from Japan and later Taiwan began appearing on hardware store shelves. Many American manufacturers responded by cutting corners wherever possible. Materials became thinner. Quality control standards relaxed. Production shifted toward lower-cost suppliers. Channellock moved in the opposite direction. Rather than compete by becoming cheaper, the company doubled down on durability. The forging operations inside Meadville continued using high-carbon American steel. Heat treatment procedures became more sophisticated. Inspection standards became stricter. The company was betting that professional tradesmen would recognize the difference. It was a risky bet because accountants could always point to cheaper alternatives. But the Darment family understood something many corporations often forget. Professionals do not buy tools the same way casual consumers do. A plumber who depends on a pair of pliers every day does not measure cost the same way someone buying a tool once every 5 years. Reliability becomes more valuable than price. A tool that works every single day for 20 years is cheaper than a tool that fails twice a year. Throughout the 1970s, that philosophy steadily strengthened Channellock's position. The blue handles became more recognizable. Contractors could identify them from across a room. Apprentices entering the trades learned from older workers which brands could be trusted and which brands could not. Channellock increasingly found itself on the trusted list. By the end of the decade, the company's products could be found in factories, power plants, construction sites, shipyards, oil fields, and maintenance departments across the United States. What had started as a small Pennsylvania blacksmith operation in 1886 was becoming one of the last great family-owned hand tool manufacturers in America, yet the greatest challenge to its survival was still ahead. During the 1980s, the economics of global manufacturing would begin changing faster than at any point in the company's history, forcing the Darment family to make decisions that would determine whether Channellock would remain an American manufacturer or become just another famous name stamped onto imported steel. During the 1980s, the pressure that would destroy much of American hand tool manufacturing arrived with remarkable speed. It did not come in the form of a recession, a technological breakthrough, or a single catastrophic event. It arrived in shipping containers. Factories across Taiwan, South Korea, and eventually mainland China began producing hand tools at labor costs American manufacturers simply could not match. A pair of pliers forged in Pennsylvania by skilled union workers using domestic steel now had to compete against products made thousands of miles away for a fraction of the cost. The numbers were brutal. By the late 1980s, labor expenses for American manufacturers could be 10 times higher than those of some overseas competitors. Retailers cared about price. Large distributors cared about price. Corporate buyers cared about price. And increasingly, consumers cared about price as well. Across the country, famous tool companies faced the same choice. Some moved production overseas entirely. Others outsourced components while keeping only assembly operations in America. Many accepted acquisition offers from larger corporations that promised efficiency and scale. The pattern repeated itself over and over. The brand survived, the factory disappeared, the logo remained, the workers did not. Inside Meadville, the Darment family watched this transformation unfold in real time. Every year brought new reports of another American factory closure. Every year brought another competitor abandoning domestic production. Accountants could easily demonstrate the financial logic. If a tool could be produced overseas for half the cost, why continue paying American wages? If consumers could not immediately tell the difference, why maintain expensive forging operations in Pennsylvania? The answers looked obvious on paper. But Channellock was not being run from a boardroom focused on quarterly earnings. It was still being run by the family whose name was attached to the building, and that changed the calculation completely. Bill Darmont, who would eventually become one of the most influential leaders in the company's history, understood that moving production overseas might improve short-term profitability while simultaneously destroying the reason customers trusted the brand in the first place. Channellock's reputation had been built over generations by workers who forged, machined, heat-treated, and inspected every tool in Meadville. Once that manufacturing knowledge disappeared, it would never come back. A factory can be closed in a month. Rebuilding a century of experience is impossible. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, while competitors chased lower costs, Channellock invested in improving the Meadville operation itself. Forging equipment became more efficient. Heat treatment processes became more precise. Computer-controlled machining systems were introduced without replacing the skilled workforce that understood how to use them. The goal was not to become cheaper than foreign competitors. That battle could never be won. The goal was to become better. Workers who spent decades on the factory floor became guardians of manufacturing knowledge that many other companies were losing. Some employees could identify minor forging defects simply by looking at a part for a few seconds. Others could hear subtle changes in machinery before instruments detected a problem. This kind of expertise does not appear in annual reports, but it determines whether a tool lasts 30 years or 3. During these same years, another important relationship was taking shape. Channellock's workforce was represented by the United Steelworkers. In many American industries, labor management relationships became increasingly hostile during the 1980s. Strikes, layoffs, plant closures, and bitter negotiations defined much of the manufacturing landscape. Meadville was different. The relationship was not perfect. There were difficult contract negotiations. There were disagreements over wages, benefits, and working conditions. But both sides understood a simple reality. If the factory survived, everyone benefited. If the factory disappeared, everyone lost. This mutual understanding helped create a level of stability that became increasingly rare in American manufacturing. By the 1990s, Channellock's blue-handled pliers had become one of the most recognizable tools in the United States. The company expanded its product line beyond traditional tongue-and-groove pliers into cutters, long-nose pliers, adjustable wrenches, and specialty tools designed for professional trades. Yet despite this expansion, management resisted the temptation to become a sprawling conglomerate. Channellock remained focused on hand tools. It remained focused on manufacturing. And perhaps most importantly, it remained focused on Meadville. Then came a challenge few companies expected. During the 1990s and early 2000s, globalization accelerated dramatically. Entire industries moved production overseas. Tool brands that had once symbolized American manufacturing quietly began sourcing products from factories in China. Store shelves increasingly filled with imported alternatives that looked similar, cost less, and arrived in enormous quantities. For many manufacturers, the pressure became overwhelming. Yet while famous names disappeared from American factory floors, Channellock continued making the same promise it had made for generations. American steel, American workers, American manufacturing. It was not always the cheapest option. It was rarely the easiest option. But it allowed the company to maintain something competitors were steadily losing: credibility. When a plumber bought a pair of Channellocks in 1998, he knew exactly where they came from. He knew who made them. He knew the factory still existed. He knew the company had not quietly replaced skilled workers with anonymous suppliers halfway around the world. That trust became one of Channellock's most valuable assets, and it would prove even more important in the years ahead when one of the most famous American tool brands of all time would be closed, outsourced, and shipped overseas, providing Channellock with a powerful example of exactly what happens when ownership priorities change. Before we finish, there is one final comparison that explains why Channellock matters. In October 2008, the workers at the V's Grip factory in DeWitt, Nebraska, walked out of their plant for the last time. 86 years of manufacturing ended with a corporate announcement. 330 jobs disappeared. The pliers remained, the brand remained, the town did not. Production moved overseas because the numbers favored overseas production. The executives who made that decision were not irrational. They were doing exactly what the structure around them required. Public corporations exist to maximize returns. If a factory in China can produce the same tool for less money than a factory in Nebraska, eventually somebody in a boardroom will ask why the Nebraska factory still exists. The spreadsheet will always have an answer. What the spreadsheet cannot calculate is what happens afterward. It cannot calculate what 330 lost jobs mean in a town of fewer than 500 people. It cannot calculate what happens when a local diner loses its customers, when a hardware store loses its contractors, when young families stop seeing a future and move somewhere else. It cannot calculate the cost of removing a century-old manufacturing culture from a community and replacing it with nothing. While DeWitt was learning that lesson, Meadville was making a different choice. Channellock faced exactly the same pressures. Cheap imports existed. Globalization existed. Foreign labor costs were dramatically lower. The company could have outsourced production. It could have licensed its name. It could have followed the path taken by dozens of famous American tool brands. Instead, the Dermont family continued betting on the same thing George Dermont had bet on in 1886. If you make something well enough, people will continue to buy it. That philosophy was tested again in 2012 when a foreign supplier responsible for grip materials entered bankruptcy. The easy solution would have been finding another overseas supplier. Instead, Channellock rebuilt that portion of its supply chain locally. Components that had once crossed oceans were sourced close to Meadville. The decision was not the cheapest option available. It was the option that gave the company more control, shorter lead times, and stronger ties to the region that had supported it for more than a century. This is the difference between a company managed for the next quarter and a company managed for the next generation. One focuses on immediate savings. The other focuses on long-term survival. The distinction sounds small until you look at the outcomes. One factory is empty. The other is still running. One town lost its manufacturing identity. The other still wakes up every morning to the sound of forging hammers. During the COVID-19 disruptions of 2020, Channellock faced another serious test. Supply chains across the world were breaking down. Factories were closing temporarily. Transportation networks were under strain. Yet because so much of the company's manufacturing knowledge remained concentrated in Meadville, recovery happened quickly. Workers returned. Production resumed. The company continued supplying professional tradesmen who depended on its tools. The crisis reinforced something the Dermont family had believed for decades: control over manufacturing matters. Not because it looks good in a marketing brochure, but because resilience becomes impossible when every critical capability exists somewhere else. By the mid-2020s, Channellock had become one of the last major family-owned hand tool manufacturers still producing its core products in the United States. The sixth generation of the Dermont family had entered leadership roles. New products continued to launch. Investments continued to flow into the Meadville facility. More than 140 years after George Dermont loaded forged tools into a horse-drawn wagon and traveled railroad towns across Pennsylvania, the company he founded was still operating in the same community. 6 generations, 1 town, 1 factory, 1 family. Very few industrial stories in America can make that claim, and perhaps that is the real reason Channellock survived when so many others disappeared. It was never simply about pliers. The tongue-and-groove design Howard Manning patented in 1933 was brilliant, but technology alone does not explain 140 years of survival. The famous blue handles do not explain it either. Neither does marketing. Neither does luck. The answer is ownership. Ownership determines incentives. Incentives determine decisions. Decisions determine outcomes. When the people making decisions are also the people who must live with those decisions for decades, the calculations change. A factory stops being a line item and becomes an inheritance. Workers stop being labor costs and become neighbors. The future stops being next quarter and becomes the next generation. Stand outside the Channellock plant on South Main Street in Meadville, Pennsylvania. Close your eyes. It is 1886, and George Darmont is forging farrier tools by hand during a Pennsylvania winter. It is 1933, and Howard Manning is sketching a new jaw design that will change hand tools forever. It is 1957, and workers are dipping steel handles into the blue coating that will become one of the most recognizable visual signatures in American manufacturing. It is 1988, and competitors are trying to challenge the company's ownership of that blue color. It is 2008, and workers in DeWitt, Nebraska, are leaving their factory for the last time, while workers in Meadville continue reporting for another shift. It is 2023, and a 6th-generation member of the Darmont family is preparing to help guide the company into its next century. Open your eyes. The building is still there, the furnaces are still running, the forging hammers are still falling. Blue-handled pliers are still moving down the production line. More than 140 years after a blacksmith decided existing tools were not good enough, hundreds of workers still come to the same Pennsylvania factory every morning to make something designed to last longer than the hand that holds it. The story of Channellock is not really about pliers. It is about what becomes possible when a company decides that permanence matters more than efficiency, that reputation matters more than margins, and that some things are worth keeping even when the spreadsheet says otherwise.